Hey, what's up? Dusk here. So today I've got another Halloween video for you. This time I'm covering the Game Informer article, which I only found out about after watching a Slash and Cast video where they talked about how they had also missed this article. So I started going through it and I realized that there was enough evidence here to figure out pretty much all of Michael Myers' kit except for maybe one ability. So how we're going to go through this video is I'm just going to tell you what his abilities are, and then I'm going to walk through and show off all the evidence that I discovered that highlights what those are. And then you can decide if you agree with that evidence or not. Let's get started. So it looks like Myers will be able to teleport. Most of you probably guessed that one at this point. He's also going to have regeneration, or just the ability to recover from mortal injury, being stabbed or shot. Most of you probably guessed that one as well. He'll also possess superhuman strength, another one you probably already all guessed. But he's also going to have an ability that will let him know things that he wouldn't otherwise know, which most likely means he's either going to get wall hacks or some kind of system that will basically organically let him know where his objectives are. And this one's going to trip you up a little bit because it tripped me up too when I discovered it. But it looks like he's probably also going to have an ability that is going to look like telekinesis, the ability to knock plants over and make noise, and open or shut doors and then lock them. And then the ability that I couldn't quite figure out, or that there is just deliberately not enough evidence to figure out, has something to do with people looking at Myers, whether it be NPCs or players, or maybe not. That again, that one is kind of really hard to figure out. So those are all of his abilities. Now let's talk about how I figured this out. Okay, I'm going to jump through a bunch of quotes and we'll start with this one. Acquiring different abilities to perform different kills on different citizens in Haddonfield in this campaign, it trains you to be the optimal Michael Myers for multiplayer. Now, this is important where it says it trains you to be the optimal Michael Myers. This means that the kit and abilities and powers that you have in single player will be identical to the abilities that you have in multiplayer, and those abilities will need to function just as well in both modes. Ilphonic has been given the green light to add things it needs to make it fun. So there are going to be some things that are going to be a little video gamey because it's a video game. For example, there's probably going to be some kind of pacing or progression where Myers will sort of like get more powerful and more dangerous as things go. Here they also make a pretty deliberate observation of what Myers is. They compare Jason to a bull in a china shop, Predator to a big cat, and Myers to a coiled up cobra that happens to be in any bush that you walk by. That's really key there, right? Any bush that you walk by. In other words, you'll never really know where he is. Okay, and now we're coming to the most important piece of evidence in the entire article. For creating Michael's move set, his kit, his abilities, powers, they said that the team watched Halloween over and over again. They paid attention to the things he does in the film and just kind of took that and determined what it meant if he could do X, Y, Z. In other words, like if Myers does something or something happens in the movie, then they ask, okay, why did that happen and how did he do it? All right, so why is this the most important piece of evidence in the whole article? Well, it means that if we retrace their footsteps and watch the 1978 Halloween over and over again and scrutinize it, we're going to see the exact same thing that the dev team saw. And we can probably come to some of the same conclusions that they came to. And I'll let you know, that's exactly what I did. I went back and watched the 1978 Halloween multiple times, and I went through it with a fine-tooth comb. And of course, it's not the first time I've seen it. Well, Halloween's my favorite. Like, it's my favorite horror franchise. Tied for second is Hellraiser and Nightmare on Elm Street. All right, so the first piece of big evidence for one of Myers' ability is when he's escaping from the psychiatric ward. He steals the car and he can drive it proficiently, and they even make a big deal in the film about saying,
From here now, for God's sakes, he can't drive a car. He was doing very well last night. Maybe someone around here gave him lessons.
so that tells us right there that Myers has access to knowledge that he wouldn't normally have access to. Now, I assume the dev team is just going to take this and be like, oh, cool, great. So this works very good with an in-game, navigation system that says, hey, your objectives are over here, go do those. So that's probably what that's going to be, but how it will manifest itself will probably be a little bit more on the organic side. Also, fun little Easter egg, if you freeze the frame right here, you can see where the actor had a wrench in his hand, because it turns out car windows are extremely tough and actually pretty hard to crack. So they had to put a wrench in the actor's hand to make it so he could actually crack the window. But what's interesting about that is that it shows off that while Myers does have superhuman strength, he seems to get even stronger after getting his first kill on the mechanic, which is where he gets his famous overalls from. And then shortly after that, now all this happens off camera, of course, Myers shows up at the cemetery in Haddonfield, and he steals the tombstone of Judith Myers. Now, this tombstone is large and solid granite, because that's what tombstones are. So to pick this thing up and move it and, take it to a car, and there's no drag marks on the ground. They show the missing divot, and it looks like it is just grabbed and pulled straight up out of the ground and then carried off.
They'd do anything for Halloween.
And then if you, jump forward to Halloween Kills, which they did say they'd, reach into the entire franchise, they make a reference and they say, well, we get, evil gets more powerful the more it kills. So this all works out, that tracks. And from a video game perspective, the idea of acquiring kills and then ramping up in strength, like that's just so on track for how video games work. You're collecting experience, goals, whatever, and then you get more powerful. Like that's just such a standard video game trope / mechanic. Like, of course it's going to work that way, especially since we see that it will also be representative of things that are happening in the films. The next big Myers moment we have is when Annie and Laurie Strode are walking down the street, and Annie looks down and it's just Laurie Strode looking up, and Myers steps out from behind this like shrub hedge wall.
Oh, look.
Look where?
Behind the bush.
Hey, creep.
He was standing right there.
Poor Laurie. I don't. I think you're wacko. Now you're seeing men behind bushes.
And you can see that it is just a very long, narrow alleyway where it's just a bush and a house. Sorry. It's a bush and a house. And there's like nowhere that he could have gone. So he very clearly disappeared. This also happens again later in the movie, but to an even more extreme degree, where Laurie goes home, she looks out the window, and there's the clothesline with the laundry blowing in it, drying outside, and she sees Myers standing there amongst the laundry, and the camera does this sort of like cut away and cut back, so you can imagine this was Laurie just kind of like maybe blinking for a second, and in that split second blink, Myers just disappeared right before her eyes. So this was a much more clean and powerful teleport. So the idea that Myers was teleporting is heavily cemented in the first film. But it also shows that these sorts of things only ever happen when there is one or fewer people looking at him. Also, Myers spends a surprisingly large amount of time in the movie driving around in a car. I'm going to be honest, I just didn't remember how much he just drives around in a car. The next scene after this that gives us some evidence about Myers' ability is the Annie kill. Now, this one is really cool, and there's a whole bunch of layers to it, to the point that I think I want to do like a film theory on the 1978 Halloween, but that's a different video. I'm not going to go into that here. We're just going to talk about the context clues for Myers' abilities. So when it came to the Annie kill, there were a few things that happened. There was this whole like suspense build up about when and where Myers might show up. And in that time, Annie went out to the little laundry house that was behind the house she was babysitting in. So she went out there, she was messing around, and you see the door that was open clearly slam shut on its own and then lock. Annie could not get out and had to like call for help essentially. The fact that the door locked was just too big of a moment to ignore.
Hello? Lindsay!
Look, just tell her it's me, okay?
Okay. You locked yourself in.
Especially because later, when Bob was killed, the exact same thing happened, but in reverse. Annie? All?
Okay, Linda. Come on out.
Annie also had a few scenes where she was walking around in the house and Myers was watching her through the glass. Well, in that time, when he stepped away, he kind of like accidentally knocks a potted plant over. So, with the movie having so many elements related to making noise, creating distractions, separating people off, and trying to isolate them, these elements will surely also be present in the game. Now, this brings us to the Linda kill, and the Linda kill is where things get a little fuzzy. This is where we get into the mechanic that I said I couldn't really figure out or wasn't sure about. And I think this is the cracked mechanic I've never seen in any game, any other game, probably comes from. During the Linda kill, Myers had already killed Bob. Bob wears glasses. So Myers took a bed sheet, cut some holes in it, put it over his head like a goofy bedsheet ghost costume, and then took Bob's glasses and put them on over top so that he could appear to be Bob. He went up to the room where Linda was staying, opened the door, and Linda was seemingly unafraid of him because she thought it was Bob and was just sitting there staring at him the whole time, talking to Myers as if he were Bob. But the interesting thing about this is Myers proceeded to just do nothing with that. He just stood in the doorway and didn't move. He could have easily just walked over to Annie and killed her, but he didn't. He did not move until Annie got up and walked over to the phone and turned her back.
Well, did you get my beer? Cute, Bob, real cute. Okay, don't answer me. Are you weird? Well, I'm gonna call Lori. I want to know where Paul and Annie are. This is going nowhere.
Hello?
As soon as she turned her back and stopped looking at Myers, he immediately moved in and killed her because at that point he was behind her. And almost all of his kills, every single one of his kills is an ambush. So I don't know what this means in game mechanic terms, but the fact that there are so many scenes where Myers doesn't really do anything too crazy unless only a single person is looking at him or nobody is looking at him. It's just such a heavy theme that there's no way that the team did not look at that and decide to deduce something from that, because something is clearly going on there. And I'm sure they even came to the conclusion that that's part of why Myers wears the mask. He doesn't like to be seen, or rather, the evil doesn't like to be seen. And this brings us to our final target, Laurie Strode, where Myers has multiple opportunities to kill. In fact, the very first kill attempt on Laurie, he is extremely close to her and walks up behind her. Laurie has no idea, and he just misses. He stabs her shirt and cuts and rips the shirt open. Later, he has another opportunity to stab Laurie, and he comes over this couch and he just like misses her. It's almost like there's something specific about Laurie that makes it hard for Myers to kill her. Either she's sort of protected, or he has a hard time seeing her properly, or there's some kind of internal conflict. And it almost certainly has to do with the fact that Laurie Strode is painted as like the good girl, innocent girl, whereas everybody else he killed were like your standard adults or, partiers or whatever else. Laurie is also portrayed as very intelligent. Now, I know some of you are thinking, oh, it's because he thinks Laurie is his sister or looks at her like a sister. I'm going to say that that's not the case. And in fact, the movie shows that if anything, he looks at Annie as his sister. And then, of course, the movie ends. Myers did not achieve his goals before the end of Halloween night, and so he just sort of disappears, which will probably just manifest itself as some sort of like timer or, round limit for the end of the game. I think what is really going to make Myers interesting isn't so much the stuff that he can do, but how the things that he can do will allow him to interact with and manipulate the world around him, distracting NPCs, using doors to cut off players, hiding places and actively watching players to see what kind of strategies they're employing. And so from this point, I really can't see Myers having any other abilities. And the only really big question mark is, of course, whatever's going on with Myers when people look at him. That's just such a gray question mark that there's really no way to figure that one out, because Ilphonic could pull all sorts of different reasons out of the air, and they could also just decide to like make something up for themselves with that, because it is just such a gray area. Whatever it is, it's probably going to be kind of neat, especially since they, made such a big deal about it that they decided to make this line and talk about how, never seen in any other game. Like, that's quite a statement to make. So it's at least going to be kind of neat. That's all the evidence. I think it's really strong evidence myself. Let me know what you think in the comments, if you agree or disagree, or if you have any theories about what you think this never seen in any game mechanic might be. Anyway, thanks for watching. We'll catch you in the next one.